Another artist you've got that I think might have done the same is South Arcade, and they're going to Atlantic. When they were having the discussions with Atlantic, were you trying to get another album off them?
That one in particular, it became pretty obvious pretty quickly that we were in deep pocket kind of territory, serious record deal kind of territory.
What does it mean to the label getting that number one?
We put up a number that a frontline label, Sony and Universal, would have been tremendously proud of.
Hey, welcome back to another episode. Before we really get into it, I want to mention that we've just released a vlog. We show you behind the scenes of everything it is, putting this together, taking it to London, filming in different locations, some of the costs that are involved in doing that, and all the difficulties of actually just booking people and moving things around and making it happen. So if you're interested in what goes into putting the podcast together, then check out the vlog. We'll put it on the screen now. It's available on YouTube. Go and watch that now if you're interested in everything it takes to make a podcast. Let's get to the episode.
Cool. So the place to start, as always, then, is how did you get started in music?
For sure. So I was born in Northern Ireland, but I was brought up in Blackpool, and we were traveling an hour to Manchester for shows. This would have been at kind of those formative years, 16 to 18. So that takes us to 2004, 2005, that kind of time. So you can imagine the kind of scenes and you can imagine the type of music that was popular. And in Blackpool, there was a punk scene and a ska scene. We just my friend groups weren't super into that. You know, we crossed over into that, but it wasn't kind of our first pick. And so we took it upon ourselves to kind of start promoting shows and slightly softer things and more like what you would call pop rock or pop punk, I suppose. And it just became a little bit of a scene. You know, in hindsight, it was the same 150 kids coming to every time we put on a show, but it felt a bit like a movement. You know, again, when you zoom out, it was just us and our friends, do you know what I mean? But at the time, it kind of gave you that feeling of we're doing something here and we're doing something for the local area, and bands were obviously coming to Blackpool for the first time and were impressed. Do you know what I'm saying? Like they got a rider, which was my parents making sandwiches and a few beers, do you know what I mean? But people showed up to the shows, and so you got good feedback, and from there obviously started to meet more artists, managers, that type of thing. And it was like a natural progression then. And that was kind of the first taste of it. And it was immediately obvious to me that was what I wanted to do with my life. And, you know, anything I could do to, you know, be around creatives and be in music, I was keen.
What were the sort of venues, like the cap size that you were putting things into?
It shows how long ago it was that most of the venues have gone now. Or the main venue was a place called Riffs at South Pier, which sadly is no longer. It was a 200 cap, you know, 250 cap, and felt full with, like I say, them 150 in it. Yeah, I mean, there was all sorts going on that I can speak about, probably because the venue doesn't exist anymore. But, you know, it was, at the time I was 17, 18, and I think by the letter of the law, maybe the venue was 18 plus, but you know, there was if the security guard started at 8 o'clock, so if you got your, you know, myself and my pals in a little bit earlier, you kind of got away with murder a little bit. And those were the type of things. I'm sure none of that goes on these days, but it felt fun. And that was, like I say, artists were really impressed because they'd never thought about playing a show in Blackpool, probably. You know, if they were from the south or if they weren't from the area, they probably would never have come. And so the fact that they could show up and there'd be a reasonable amount of people there, they loved it.
What was the move then from being a promoter to being a label? And did you think about carrying on as a promoter?
For sure. I mean, it was just a natural progression for me. Like I said, you started to meet artists, you started to meet, you know, some people who were in the industry, and through talking, you sort of hear that they were having a negative experience perhaps with the label. It was a different time. There wasn't as many aggregators. There wasn't as many ways to self-release music. You kind of needed help in that time. And certainly if you wanted to press vinyl or you wanted to press CDs, they needed money and they needed financial help to do that. So it felt like a natural step. I always used to love, you know, reading CD booklets, you know, getting into vinyl, like liner notes and lyrics and things. And so it was a natural progression to help out with that. And they all needed, you know, it was nothing more complicated than perhaps they didn't have the money to make 500 CDs. And I probably didn't have the money to make, but I kind of found a way, do you know what I mean? And by default, you become the label at that stage. There was no business plan or there was no long-term vision. It was just wanting to be around, wanting to help, not being sadly talented, not being able to play guitar or sing. So this was my way to kind of be around creatives and get, be around artists.
How did you manage then, like, cash flow and doing those releases?
One release at a time with difficulty. There wasn't a lot of cash about. It was, literally from the shows, which I've seen some of the posters recently, it was £4 in, so there can't have been that much cash around in advance, and £5 on the door. So a little bit from there, a little bit from just selling stuff on the merch desk and stuff. And, it wouldn't be an exaggeration to say the £1,000 or whatever to press 500 CDs in 2005 was all that was in the bank account. And you just went one record at a time, crossed your fingers. And, in that sense, you had everything to lose, but really it felt like you had nothing to lose. Do you know what I mean? It was just about, getting from one record to another. And it was more wholesome almost. It was always just, we're into this. We think we can kind of bang fist on the desk and tell people this is an awesome record that you should spend £5 or £10 on. And, you had to sell them, because if you didn't make another one. So, that must do as a good master, or whatever the phrase is. We had to sell the records.
How did you then go from what sounds then like sort of a bedroom label to actually being like a proper label and company?
It was a bedroom label for several years, a good few years. Out of university, I'm at my halls really in university, which again speaks to my age that they don't exist anymore. It was kind of like a prison cell when I think back to it. Just by default, some of those artists, some of those bands at the time that we were working had higher profile managers, managers who work for major record labels and things. So just sort of looked our way into bigger rooms, more, I suppose, important rooms. And through that started to get a little bit of interest, I think, of the wider industry. There probably wasn't a lot of startup labels at the time for all the reasons we just discussed. It was hard to kind of get a start. And so maybe that gave us a little bit of an edge, or gave me a little bit of an edge. And, through that sort of, the records kind of got bigger, and also just sticking at it. I think there's so many labels, and maybe we'll get into this later, but there's so many labels that have 5 releases or 10 releases, and that, if that's your thing, then more power to you. But I think when you start, people ask me all the time, what's the difference between that bedroom or that, even like a management company with a label or whatever. And I'm like, if you stick at it to 25 releases, 50 releases, how many record labels in this country have 100 plus releases? Do you know what I mean? I think that you have to earn your stripes a little bit. And, some people were smart and got out after 5 releases, you know what I mean? But for whatever reason, we're lifers, and here we are kind of hundreds in. But I think that makes the difference.
Was there a specific release or band that you signed that were like the tipping point that brought in the money to make it real?
Yeah, that's a good question. We got to a point where we started licensing things from the US. There's a label called Tragic Hero out of North Carolina, and we started to do some records with them and license other things from Equal Vision and things like that. I think that was just, we had route to, at the time, having a route to shops was everything. Clearly Spotify was just coming into being, but really physical was what mattered, and we had a route to HMV, we had a route to the indies, and so as a consequence, these US companies would trust us, much bigger companies than us, would trust us with the UK release, and Razor and Tie and Tragic Hero and Equal Vision. And so that immediately kind of elevated it, because we were suddenly working, Here's Legend, or we were suddenly working Confide, or the Somerset, or, these kind of different records that were buzzy in the US, or artists that had established kind of, and suddenly, we were, had adverts in Kerrang and things like this. So that was, I'm not sure I could pinpoint one moment. That's been the story of the company, really, is that it's been a very, very slow build over many, many years. So, perhaps there was one that kind of took it over the top, but it feels like it was just brick by brick,
And was doing those licenses an easier or cheaper way to get bigger bands involved in the label?
100%. There's zero shot that we could have signed a band of that size, you know, to like a global deal at that stage. It was just because perhaps those indies didn't have a route to kind of UK market, but those bands were selling tickets here, so they needed an outlet. It was simpler to, you know, at the time to kind of divvy up the territories in terms of physical. It wasn't like now where people aren't inclined to separate out the world, you know, or go territory by territory because they want to own the digital rights, and they, you know, they're worried about something blowing up on social in the UK or in Australia, or it's hard to tell sometimes where it's going to go. So people be more conscious about that now. But yeah, without a doubt, that kind of got us to a point where it made sense to press 2,000 CDs, or do you know what I mean, on certain acts, which probably wouldn't have been the case with, you know, the rest of the roster at the time.
And what was it you were specifically like responsible for in the UK? Was it distribution, marketing?
Yeah, principally distribution. I suppose kind of marketing came with that, but again, at the time it was, you know, are we going to pay for 1/4 of a page in Kerrang or Rock Sound, or can we get it on the Rock Sound cover CD? You know, that kind of made up the most of the marketing. A few reviews meant a lot in that time. Do you know what I mean? If Kerrang would give you 4 or, you know, even a 5 out of 5, like that sold records. If at that stage people kind of would take a chance on a new band or a band they'd never heard of if the review was glowing. And we also had a couple of 1s out of 5 as well, which, you know, I think that was the nature of journalism, probably still the nature of journalism, but at the time that was the nature of journalism. There isn't much in it to write a 3 out of 5 review, whereas if you write a 5 out of 5 or a 1 out of 5, it's sensationalist, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, we definitely had one band I remember took it quite personally. The 1 out of 5. I actually loved the record, but
Was that a US band?
No, it was a British band.
Was that directly signed to you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, and you know, one of the early and this record, I'll say, the boys won't mind. I don't think there's a band called the UPARWR in very early days, iterations of the label, and I think some of the songs are still on YouTube, not for us, but you can kind of find them. And I loved that record, and you know, the CD looked amazing, and you know, it felt great. But yeah, some chap whose name I can't remember gave it a 1 out of 5 in Kerrang, and you know, we all took it really personally because we loved this EP, and you know, but I think it was more sensational. Like I say, if he'd just written a 2 out of 5 or a 3 out of 5, probably wouldn't have talked about it, wouldn't have posted it on MySpace or whatever we were doing at the time, and or you know, I think the singer was talking about it on stage and things. Do you know what I mean? And we wouldn't have done that if it was just an average review. So maybe there was method to that.
I mean, I guess now it's funny to look back at that and laugh. At the time, do things like that, did you sit there thinking like this could end the label because we're not going to get the sales?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely hurt. You take it personally when it's your brand and when it's your band, you know, like same for singer, guitarist, or whatever of the band. You take it very, very personally, you know, and it's the same when even now, you know, I think that's probably one of the differences. We talk a lot about the difference between being independent and being, you know, part of a big corporation. There's pros and cons to both of those. But I mean, you guys will know because your brand means a lot, and you know, it's a family brand and all that. You know, if you want people to speak glowingly about it because it's an extension of you. And so at the time, yeah, it was it would have hurt, something like that for sure. Whether we would have attributed it to like lack of sales, or I didn't believe in the record any less. We absolutely loved it, and were utterly convinced it was kind of the best thing we'd done to that point. And yeah, we were just bitter. I wanted to sit there. I've really blanked the guy's name out. I genuinely don't know the chap's name, but you know, we all wanted to sit him down and sort of explain it. Do you know what I mean? Like, this is why it's great. You know, you've not given it time. Come and see a show. Yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like that kind of thing. But yeah, I'm sure he wouldn't have listened. But
was there any actual hit and miss moments with the label in those early days where you thought like we might not get through this?
No, I mean, it's constantly on sort of it's life support, if that's what you want to call it. Do you know what I mean? How I convinced my parents out of university was I said, you know, just give me a year. You know, what have we got to lose? I'm kind of 21, whatever age I was. let me have a year at it, and if it goes as we perhaps all think it's going to go, then I'll be 22 and I'll get a normal job. And that was the same point. And so, yeah, for sure, there was a couple of moments in those days. I mean, everything you bet on in those days is basically taking the bank balance to zero.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And I remember there was a couple of things we offered on, and it's genuinely like sleepless nights, you know, and thinking we're betting the ranch on this, and there's still a little bit of that goes on, but happily we're at a stage now where there's a foundation, and not one project could bankrupt the thing, but every project you bet on in those kind of first 10, 25 releases, if it doesn't go great, then that's kind of you and off to the job centre.
You referenced having the distribution. The distribution now, I guess, is ADA.
Yeah.
Was it the same then? And what difference did that make when you got ADA?
For sure. So no, at the time, again, in the early stages of the label, it would have been split up. Digital and physical. Digital distribution was still a pretty new concept at that point. Physical would have gone through Plastic Head, which that company still exists, and kind of different distributors. But ADA, we did the deal in 2017. So you fast forward a few years, it made a huge difference to us because it was the first time having jumped from sort of different digital distributors, and not really having a home for a couple of years here or a couple of years there. They sort of saw the vision and the sort of beauty of ADA, without selling their dream for them. The beauty of ADA is it's owned by Warner. So whilst we still have autonomy and we're still independent, we can kind of plug into that framework, plug into that major label system, be paid on the major label, and our artists paid on the major label royalty scale, and have that, you know, physical distribution the same way a major would, and have that international plot the same way, you know, an artist signed to a frontline Warner label would. And that's been the best of both for us. Obviously, that relationship is now, coming on 8 years. And, you know, that's been it's made a huge difference, just solidifying like our business and helping grow our business, because increasingly with social and TikTok and all those kind of things, a band from a small town or city in the UK, something can go in Southeast Asia, something can go in the US or Australia, and you have to be able to plug in. You know, you have to be ready to adapt to that.
Do you think then in today's climate you're able to operate without a major distributor like that because of that reason?
I'm biased. But yeah, I mean, I definitely spend a lot of my time kind of making the case for indies. I think that the playing field has never been more level in terms of, you know, if you go back to the start of the label, you probably did need to sign to a major if you were going to get to radio, if you were going to get to, you know, your record in every shop. For the most part, you needed to be on a major. I think now with social and the way that distribution works and the way that it's just, you know, there's so much volume in music, you know, there's still great people. I don't want to sit here and slag off, you know, and say major labels are the devil and everyone who works there is not the case at all. There's some great people who work at majors, but I'm a DIY guy we just talked about it from early. I'm an independent guy from it. So I'm always going to advocate for, you know, having that creative control as an artist and having the, you know, when you get used to, we've done this obviously for like 17, 18 years. When you're used to doing it a certain way, and when you're used to being able to just sit down with the manager or sit down with the artist and make a decision and then execute on that decision in 10 minutes, on those occasions where we have worked with a major or done a JV somewhere, when you have to run something past the board or when you have to run something up the flagpole, it gets very frustrating because we're used to just being able to take a decision, make a decision and act on it. You know, so for sure, I would be a huge advocate of artists retaining their rights through an indie, but artists retaining their rights in 2025. I just think there's never been a better time. Artists have never had more control. Artists have never had more power than they do now. So, you know, I would say sign any contract. That's not just a recording contract. Signing a management contract that locks you down in a certain way. You know, I think all those deals have come towards the artist and utilize that. kind of, particularly if you have a business already.
With all of that in mind, is it more important from the label perspective then to have artists that are more business savvy than they used to be, especially like with all the self-promotion and with TikTok and all those outlets?
100%. I mean, I think things like this, there's been a huge shift in artist education about the industry since TikTok. I think that there was a lot of, and there's still some areas of our industry that artists aren't privy to or are just deliberately confusing. When you start getting into like neighboring rights, and I've spent my career on the master side, so certain things sometimes come up on the publishing side, and I'm like, that's mad. Is that how that works? Do you know what I mean? And I'm sure people on the publishing side probably think that about our world as well. But I think particularly since COVID, it feels like, I guess, TikTok kind of, took a new, lease of life, and Reels and stuff took a new lease of life during COVID. I think artists are so much better read now and understand the picture from early and understand what it means, perhaps. Whereas maybe back in the day, even when I was getting my start, not to say we would have done this, but there was probably management contracts or record deals or publishing deals happening where they were just kind of sneaking them through. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And people were, whereas now, I think, I can't remember the last time we started talking to an artist and there wasn't already a lawyer in situ. The lawyers are on stuff before we are. So, I think that's kind of been a huge thing. The education of artists and learning about music, and it comes from podcasts like this. I think that's made a world of difference.
So is it important to the label, or is it off-putting if a band comes to you and they're not interested in the business, or they just shrug and say that's not my job?
For sure, I think that it can be a balance. It's great when artists understand the industry. I think some of the toughest things we've done have been very young artists coming in who haven't had that experience of self-releasing, or haven't had that experience of perhaps being on a major record label or something, haven't had a manager, and they perhaps expect more from a partner, any partner, than is realistic. Some of the best, by the same token, some of the best things we've done as artists coming off of a major, and perhaps they've been stifled to a degree, or creatively stifled, and we're able to give them that freedom, and they relish that. They're kind of taking it back to the roots, and that's been a really positive step. But I think we're all looking to find an artist that, understands the game. Their job is to create, and we shouldn't forget that. But I think if you were asking me to draw the perfect artist, it's that kind of creativity mixed with someone who understands the business and someone who understands our role, and that, fundamentally this is a business, and we're trying to grow together in partnership.
Is there a band that you started working with sort of early on where you were just sort of like super buzzed and excited because you thought like, you can't believe you're getting to work with somebody at that level, or a label or license that you did where it's like, this would have been a dream label to me and now I'm doing something with them?
100%. Yeah, I mean, there was a couple of licenses in those early, perhaps we're fast forwarding now to kind of 2010, 2011. We did a Somerset record, which is funny because that's just come back around, and we now do that for the world. But at the time we were licensing it for the UK and Europe from a company called Razor and Tie, which is a big, well-funded, and there was a couple of kind of pinch me moments when we were doing that license. And let's be real, it was whatever it was, 500 units in the UK. It wasn't like crazy, but the fact that they were entertaining a conversation with us at the time seemed like, what are you guys thinking, kind of thing. And the Somerset came over and did, there was a magazine called Our Zone. We're going back a bit now, but there's a magazine called Our Zone, and the Somerset came over and did a free tour, which the concept of that American band coming over to the UK and putting on shows for free. And so that was one. We also worked a Hello Goodbye record at that time. A couple of Cartel records at that time, and those are all bands that I'd listened to and loved kind of growing up.
Was that licensing from Drive-Thru?
No, so Hello Goodbye were out of the Drive-Thru deal. The first record, I want to say, was on Drive-Thru and had the big Here in Your Arms, I think is the name of the song, right? The big single. on it. So they were out. So it was independent at that stage. And yeah, both bands I think were independent, and we were doing it for the UK and Europe. But like I say, they were acts that I had listened to. Hush Sound was another one, which was had been on Fueled by Ramen, but I think was independent by the time we did the record. Yeah, they were all bands I listened to as a kid, and for sure it was a pinch me moment to kind of work with them, and probably elevated our brand for sure at the time. That we were able to, like you say, were licensed acts from the States that would have been far bigger than anything we could have signed in the UK.
I mean, some of those labels you've just mentioned, I might be completely wrong with this, but it seems to me that more so back probably 20 years ago, and on the American side, there were labels like Drive Through and Hopeless and lots of labels that had massive followings in themselves, and they were popular as labels to like the audience, and if a band signed it, they were into it. There doesn't seem to be as many of those now, other than the ones that were back then and they've just carried on. And it doesn't seem to me that there's as many in the UK where the label has the following.
You would have given a Fueled by Ramen band or artist every chance because you respected the label and you loved their taste and you loved the previous six things they signed. That would have been me for sure from young. It's interesting, and I was thinking about this on the way over, what the difference is between the US and the UK. I guess a lot of those brands, and that's very much my world, by the way, but a lot of those brands you just talked about come from a certain place. They come from that kind of alt, rock, pop punk, whatever you want to call it, like space, which I suppose traditionally the US has done far better than we have. We're trying over here, but you know, they've done it far better than us. I guess the equivalent, and I kind of straddled both camps. You know, I was into some indie, I guess, and closer maybe to some of the stuff we were now in those days, and I guess then you're in the realm of a Domino or an XL or whatever it might be. And we had a few of those. Big Scary Monsters I mentioned recently was you know, a big inspiration at that time because they were doing really cool things with like CD and vinyl, and you know, had that DIY ethic, and it's still a label today. But yeah, it's interesting why. I mean, I think it must be because the landscape, the only thing I can think of is that the landscape, maybe now, but going back the ways, was very kind of major label oriented in the UK. We didn't have, you know, quite so many amazing indies. It wasn't as easy to self-release. Hopefully that's changing now. And so, you know, there's definitely labels kind of coming through, and hopefully they continue to. But for sure, if you talk about what inspired me in those formative years to get into it, they were almost exclusively US labels.
I guess with some of those labels as well, the reason the public followed them was because they were so specific in what they were releasing. Like, if it was a pop punk label, it released pop punk. With Lab, are you more interested in making sure that you're across the board and you're diverse rather than it being like pigeonholed to one genre?
Yeah, you definitely don't want to be pigeonholed. We love throwing in a curveball, you know, and we actively talk about that. If, you know, it feels like sometimes it feels like we've gone too far down one road. Sometimes it's for what, you know, you can't necessarily decide what's going, you know, what you're known for, kind of what's going the best. And if what's going the best is two or three things in a certain lane, then we kind of actively discuss, okay, we should surprise people, you know, we should do something a little bit different. We've never wanted to be, oh, that's that rock label, that's that pop punk label. It's always just been stuff that we respond to. Maybe it would be easier to just exist in one genre.
Does that not make it harder to build a brand?
Yeah, probably. I think in some ways it would be easier to just do all singer-songwriters or all rock bands or whatever. But yeah, therein lies the problem. You then inevitably find an amazing singer-songwriter that you respond to, and you're like, oh, well, we can't because it doesn't align with the brand. But for sure, I think, you know, if you go back to what we talked about, those early kind of roots when Rock Sound or Kerrang or Enemy was the root, kind of pitching those same people the next cab off the rank would probably have been easier. But also we're kind of stubborn, and I'm northern, so we have this kind of chip on the shoulder mentality sometimes of like, you know, we can take on the big boys. Do you know what I mean? Like, let's do a pop thing because we can match them. And sometimes, you fall flat on your face and you look stupid for doing that. But yeah, that's what keeps it fresh. I think that we're able to do different things, and yeah, I think that's always something we point to when we're pitching an act that maybe doesn't necessarily perfectly align with the brand.
Yeah.
It's like, we've always done this. We've always done something a bit different.
It's funny because I was probably buying half of your CDs off you back in 2005.
I owe you a pint then.
With things being more established now and you being like a successful indie label, how has that changed with signing bands and the budgets and the way that you manage the finance of those bands?
The budget's definitely gone up. We still try and do deals that make sense. And the goal is, transparently, the goal is to get to a point after 18 to 24 months where the record's profitable. And that's for our benefit, for sure. But I also think it's for the artist's benefit. I think, we've definitely had acts go and sign to major record labels and end up with incredible unrecouped balances that probably have no shot at ever recouping. And so that's just deliberately not the sport we play. We want to, spend money in a sensible way for our benefit, yeah, but also for the artist's benefit. And in terms of how that's managed, yeah, we have a team that accounts for the company. We have a team, one person that accounts to artists directly, and that's been a huge change actually, and probably the part that not a lot of people speak about. As you grow, and as your catalog grows, that there's this huge administrative burden that I don't think we had considered really, or thought, because no one really speaks about it. And maybe that's why these podcasts are really important, because it depends on your perspective. That's either a really interesting piece or a really boring piece. But, I think that's something that now our eyes are open to that. And that's a part, we were constantly fixated on, doing the sexy parts, marketing the records and growing an act. Whereas you have to also remember there's a huge administrative bit that you have to make sure your contracts are in order, make sure your accounting's in order, and everyone's happy.
If a band is recouped, how do they then get paid? Is that regular royalties or twice a year, once a year?
So our deals are net receipts deals, exactly like you just described, licenses. So yes, it will be a split, usually in the band's favour. Let's maybe not get into the specifics of that or cause myself a problem, but yeah, it'll be in the band, not usually, always in the band's favour. So let's pretend that a band is on a 60-40 net receipts deal. Obviously, when we've recouped, they are paid 60% of profits in simple terms. That differs from record to record. We have some artists that we account to literally monthly, and the vast majority would be quarterly. And then there's some perhaps slightly older ones, some of the older deals, where it'd be biannually. Or if there's like a big physical component, that the pipeline income tends to be slower on physical. So sometimes it makes sense, or the vast majority of the royalties are paid biannually.
With the signings, do you prefer to do like full album deals or licenses?
So we're mixing that up at the minute. We are definitely licensing everything, and it's a set term. So, we are given permission, again, I'm not a lawyer, but in very simple terms, we are given permission to exploit album one, let's say, for a mutually agreeable amount of time. Let's call it 10 years, after which the rights revert. And at that stage, there's a conversation generally speaking, between us and artists about re-upping and what that looks like. And sometimes the terms change. But yeah, it's all licenses, whether that's an artist very, very early in their career and we're just doing 2 EPs to kind of get started, or whether it's a slightly more established thing and it's, an album deal. It would always be a license on a net receipt. So we kind of pride ourselves on being really, really simple. Do you know what I mean? Like we would like to think that most artists could understand our terms. You know, you shouldn't have to have a lawyer or your manager lay out what this means. You know, that's something that we're largely in control of, and there's just no reason for it to be overcomplicated.
And I guess then, so the reason for doing it as a license is just to keep things simple for everybody.
Yeah.
When you did the deal with ADA, did that come with an advance to you to help you sign things?
So we have a drawdown, they call it, from ADA that we can dip into when we need to. Again, we try and be self-sufficient and not, back to the unrecouped balance chat. You know, it would be hypocritical if we had a massive unrecouped balance when I'm telling artists not to do that. But that's there for when our more competitive things and our more buzzy things and deals we want to be into. From perhaps we're not on it quite so early, or maybe we're on it early, but there's a lot of people at the table already. We have access to that.
Are they single album deals that you're doing, or are you doing multi-album?
Differs from deal to deal, but we definitely do a bunch of one album deals.
Does that make it more difficult to pick it back up if the album does well?
You sometimes can be a victim of your own success there. Yeah, 100%. I think, again, it's hard to speak about yourself. I think our reputation, you'd have to ask managers, you'd have to ask lawyers who aren't me, because I'm biased, but I think our reputation is that we're artist friendly. And I don't think there's too many artist lawyers in the country that lose sleep or get very worked up about the ins and outs of our deals. They're generally known to be pretty artist friendly. And part of that is not signing an artist or tying an artist down for multiple records. You know, if it's very early in the career, I think signing 3 albums anywhere is a dangerous thing or a scary thing. So it's easier to kind of go one record at a time. Happily, we're at a stage now where we can re-up a lot of the times, but for sure, there's people with deep pockets out there.
The obvious one that comes to mind right now is the case just having, or recently having, a number one.
Yeah.
If that was on one album, surely there's got to be lots of labels.
So that was our second K's record. Yeah, we've done 2 albums on K's, and definitely there's a bunch of conversations going on just now. You know, we sold 25,000 first week, so you know you wouldn't have to be a brilliant A&R to think that might be good business for your your company. You know, I think it's an ongoing one. I think we have a very compelling conversation and pitch based on, and the band has earned the right, you know, to be independent, and have seen what it means to self-release, have seen what it means to, so yeah, that's an interesting one and an ongoing one. Yeah.
Does that make it difficult for you to plan for the future if you don't know what releases you've got tied down?
I think we can always work 12 to 18 months in advance. For sure, maybe it's slightly harder to plan 5 years out, but don't forget we have, you know, a foundation of a catalogue now. You know, there's kind of 1,200 songs in the catalogue, which is a really fortunate position to be in. And that just gives us that little bit of security. But for sure, you know, we're planning kind of 12 months, 18 months out. But yeah, I guess if you have 5 artists signed to 5 album deals, do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Then you kind of know what's coming. Or you can kick your feet up on the desk a little bit more. But yeah, I mean, that's a healthy thing. It means that we're constantly having to go back to the well, constantly having to find the next thing, which I think is part of the job.
Can it work out well for you, sort of with it working the other way, where if it does go to another label or to a major, that then you still have the back catalogue and you're going to earn off that because that label's going to put money into it and that's going to reflect back on the previous albums?
No doubt. And not just for us, for the artist. You know, I think that there's definitely been occasions where artists have gone and signed a deal for futures. We have continued to control the catalogue, and you know, I won't go into specifics, but there's definitely been significant record deals signed, and our monthly royalty check or bank transfer has kind of kept the band on the road. or, because you don't, sometimes the inner workings of those deals looks a bit different. And, sometimes perhaps the tour support's dried up, or that, you've used it in a different country or something like this. So, actually the royalties we're paying on the catalogue is kind of keeping things moving, despite the fact they're signed to this huge corporation on a very significant record deal. So I would argue, yes, it's to our benefit, but I think it's also to the artist's benefit. If you are going to go and do a deal, I think controlling that bit of the catalogue just gives you a safety net.
Another artist you've got that I think might have done the same or done that thing is South Arcade. And they're going to Atlantic.
Yeah, so we're actually still in deal. We have a couple of songs to go, but yes, it's been announced and done for a while now that band is signing to Atlantic, US. It was a futures deal. So yes, band, it was a JV with the manager, our deal, but band manager, us, will continue to control the catalogue and exactly what we just described, but no kind of shade on Atlantic. That's a phenomenal deal for the band. And, what an achievement for a band from Oxford, to get to the point where they had every label basically in the world, every US label queuing up, to sign it, because of how much they understand social, because of how much they've grown it, because of the songs. And so, yeah, they were able to kind of choose their adventure with their deal. And I hope, for all the reasons you just said, and because they're extraordinarily nice kids, that they become the biggest band in the world. That would be both a selfless and a selfish wish. But yeah, they deserve it. And yeah, I hope very much that one goes perfectly to plan.
How did it come around with signing them? Did you pick them up before they had the explosive TikTok?
So, they'd had, yes, is the short answer, but they'd had, and this has been our case with a lot of acts that have had kind of virality, they'd had a few kind of murmurs, kind of mini viral moments before the big viral moment. And I think that's probably, I'm sure that's not unique to us. They'd had they'd proven the concept and done it in 4 or 5 different ways before the Danger sound and kind of concept and video went crazy. Yes, we have worked it for about 2.5 years now, along with Ben Carter, the manager. And we found it was just something that spoke to me. Everything we talked about actually is pretty relevant because it spoke to me. It reminded me very much of a band I would have loved as a kid. And I don't know how much you kind of know about the lore of this band or, the content that they make. But despite the fact they're much, much younger than I am, they're kind of obsessed with early 2000s and, bands like No Doubt and Limp Bizkit. And, I don't know kind of where they're finding the clothes, which charity shops are selling like the Guitar Hero tees and things. But, and when I saw them, it just spoke perfectly to me, to the sort of band that I would have loved at 16, 17. I would love to sit here and say, I saw the kind of, the return of pop punk, or I saw the early 2000s kind of thing coming. Not really the case. It was just, I thought the songs were awesome and I totally understood it, and wanted to be involved. And yeah, the band deserves all the credit for, understand their audience, understand how to grow as a band in 2025, or before that in 2023 or 2024. But they've also executed, perfectly on the offline opportunities. Yes, it grew out of social and it started there, but you still then have to have the chops. When you're thrown into bigger rooms, you can sink or swim. And, I just watched them at Reading and Leeds, and they had the production and the big spray cans and all that. And it looked like they never played a smaller stage in their life. Do you know what I mean? They're just made for that. And that's a credit to them, because it's one thing getting it started on social and understanding that and getting views. But then you're thrown into big rooms or festival main stages. You can be out of your depth pretty quick. And they've just, every single challenge, they've lived up to it.
Does it make it really easy for the label where the band can control that narrative and they know what they want to be pushing out because the marketing is sort of almost done for you?
Well, like I say, that band deserves all that credit in terms of, understanding the fan base, understanding what's going to work on social, and they are obsessed with that type of content, and they've committed to the bit. I mean, the example I give very often was they kind of came to us with a video for a song called Stone Cold Summer, and they explained that whilst it had been shot normally, that they were going to put it on YouTube in 480p, or they'd exported it in 480p. And I remember sort of thinking, this video wasn't cheap. Like, this is wild. We put videos on YouTube in 4K, whatever, normally. But the amount of time, they were totally right. And the amount that, firstly, in the comments of that video, a bunch of people have noticed, which speaks to the lore and, all that. And the nostalgia. The amount of times that I ultimately then brought it up in, internal meetings, just speaking to how committed they were to the bit, and how committed they were to this. The EP was called 2005, and, this is how committed they are to this, is that we're putting videos on YouTube in 480p. And, that is all credit to them, that's kind of how in love with what they do they are. And, I think that's kind of spoken to this new audience that, wear the jorts and, get into all that and kind of long for that time when, maybe when we were growing up.
It's hard to find a pair of fucking jorts now, man.
I can't say I've looked. I think I might be slightly too old for jorts. But they must be out there somewhere, because I see the kids at the Reading and Leeds, and I see the kids at the South Arcade shows for sure. But yeah, definitely there's some comments on there, not just about 480p, but about, where are you finding the Hurley t-shirts? Where are you finding the jorts? Like all that stuff. Yeah, I wish if I'd had the foresight, I would have, raided a Hot Topic or something in 2005 or 2006 and just stored it for 20 years.
When they were having the discussions with Atlantic, were you trying to get another album off them?
I think in the early stages of those conversations, there was a time when we were making the case. That one in particular, it became pretty obvious pretty quickly that we were in, without getting into any specifics, deep pocket kind of territory, serious record deal kind of territory. And, that's one where you say, you just don't begrudge it. That's one where you say, you guys have earned the right. We knew going in what our deal was. And we've, like I say, we've got sort of 2.5 years worth of music there. And so, quite quickly, I think, we understood the, lay of the land there.
With the distribution of things, we've talked a bit about the physical being extremely important in the early days. Is that still important, or is Spotify completely taken over? Do you just worry about the playlists, or is the physical still something that you really focus on?
Yeah, we sort of gone back to, those late 2000s or 2010 onwards almost. Don't get me wrong, streaming, social is still massive and really important if you want to break a new artist. But I think now, in COVID, it was obviously a lot. It was TikTok to streaming. And, we were in this really unhealthy phase of, not just us, the industry as a whole, in this really unhealthy phase of giving up on records. If it didn't land on the right New Music Friday, or, believing in a record on the Thursday, and then if the playlist didn't come in, kind of moving on to the next single at midday on Friday. Do you know what I mean?
Does New Music Friday make a difference to you?
I think it's a combination of everything. I think it just gives everyone that feeling that we were right about this tune. We were right about this project. And that's not just us. That's the manager. That's the PR. That's the artist. But it's not the be all and end all. I think, you know, definitely the biggest records in our catalogue, I'm sure, never had New Music Friday. It doesn't tend to dictate the songs that we're always trying to create, and the songs that mean the most in our catalogue are the ones that are still being discovered 1, 3, 5 years in. And I'm not sure New Music Friday has any bearing on that. Do you know what I mean? It's a very 1 day or 1 week situation. But for sure, it still means a lot to us. We want each record to launch well because a lot of prep and time and effort goes in. But no, I think hopefully we're out of that phase, which it felt like we were in COVID, where it was, if you didn't land day one playlists, it was an absolute disaster, catastrophe. You know, I think in any project, particularly a developing artist, medium term or long term is a far better way to think. And yeah, COVID, which was no one's fault, you know, just the nature of COVID and not being able to play shows, and physical became less of a thing, and all that just meant that you were obsessed with, can we get something going on TikTok? Are we going to land on day one playlists? And if, you know, the answer to those things were no, you were sort of in the doldrums. Whereas I think there's a few different routes now beyond those bits, although they're still important.
With the case and them getting the number one, you got that through the physical.
Yeah.
Were they worried about the streaming numbers, or was everyone involved just like, let's smash the physical and not worry about the Spotify?
For sure. I mean, I've been asked this question a bit. The streaming numbers and the Spotify monthly listen number particularly has come up considerably on the artist. So it's certainly growing. And there are some metrics beyond kind of monthly listeners and things, like the amount of times streams per listener and things, that are really, really positive. For sure, I think they sort of hover around 300,000 monthly listeners. That number is low compared to the number of tickets they sell, and compared to the number of records we sold. For sure, that number is low, and that's an ongoing conversation and an ongoing thing that we're addressing. But no, I don't think we were unduly concerned about that. It was a very, like you say, very physical heavy campaign, long pre-order, and we were utilizing indie retail, we were utilizing D2C, and doing all those things. They have an amazing fan base that, you know, collect different records, and as long as we keep pushing them and making beautiful things they can hold, then, you know, they show up every time. And I think for any rock act or guitar act, if you are in the chart game, and that's not for everybody, but if it is if first week is meaningful, then you have to play the physical game. I'm not sure you're ever going to compete with a Sabrina or a Taylor or an Ed. You know, pound for pound on streaming, you're going to get killed. So that's where we can win, is, you know, getting into the physical formats.
What are some tips then for getting your physical sales up?
I think, generally speaking, if you can sell tickets, you can sell vinyl. You know, that's probably an oversimplification, but that, I think, is a pretty good rule of thumb. Did
they have a strong split between vinyl and CD?
Yeah, so I think that was what was pretty exceptional on that campaign, was that of the number we did, it was 11,000 vinyl. There is, you know, a big movement, and don't get me wrong, it's not easy to sell CDs, so I'm not devaluing that by any stretch, but there is kind of a movement when I look at the charts that you can be very heavy CD percentage. So we were proud of the overall number, and we were really proud of the vinyl number for sure. Sorry, I forgot your question. Were they worried? I know the original question.
Yeah, the original question was about the
streaming.
Did they worry about the streaming?
Yeah.
Oh, it was tips. That's what.
Tips.
What were the tips?
To get the physical. So I think if you can sell tickets, first of all, absolutely. I think getting inventive with your packaging. There's a variety of kind of different formats, be that CD, be that vinyl. I think, you know, if you're the type of band artist that has that committed fan base, make sure you have Easter eggs, make sure you have, you know, you're rewarding those super fans that are going to buy the physical, and give them just a quality product that hopefully they feel like they've had value for money. That's whenever we have something land on someone's doorstep, that's what I want them to feel, is like, this was worth whatever the vinyl cost, £20 or £25. It feels good. It's, perhaps it's signed, it's a collectible that way. So that would be something I would address for sure if I was a young band trying to bring that up. And also look at, not just your D2C, although that's important. How am I reaching my core audience? Am I using Discord? Am I using OpenStage? Am I socials really important? But can I also reach the people I need to reach? Be that on mailing list, social ads, and give them an offering that is meaningful to them. So for some acts, that'll be tying it in with merch. For some acts, that will be making sure, like I say, you have a signed piece, art print, something like that, give them value for money, and then make sure you're getting out into independent retail as well. A lot of these shops, be it in London or Birmingham or Manchester, have an audience that are loyal to the shop. So I think artists need to realize that as well. As much as you're bringing your fans to those events, there are loyal people to Assai in Scotland or Wax and Beans in Bury or whatever that you can kind of pick up on. And if you're willing to go above and beyond and do, a little in-store performance or whatever, grow that part of your business, take that part of your business seriously, because it is independent from your live, your merchandising, your D2C probably.
Is this something that bands should be thinking about before signing with a label, so that they know that the support's going to be there when it happens? And if they didn't think about it and the support isn't there, what can they then do to try and push the label to do more?
Yeah, I think absolutely all these things about an artist should think about, a band should think about. I think, the best projects we've worked are the ones that are self-sufficient and the ones that understand what it means to self-release and go through the process. And I'm sure that's the same for like managing. If you don't understand what a manager's going to bring, when you sit down with a suitor, how are you going to know what to ask? How are you going to know if they're bringing that 20%, the commission they're going to ask for? How do you know they're bringing more value than that? So I think that's exactly what we need from a young artist. If the label's not doing it, I'm a big advocate of just getting out there and kind of proving the concept. I think the beauty of physical and independent retail is it's very relationship based. We just had a project that has a record coming out at the end of the year, and we weren't planning to do any in-stores because the band's touring right around the album drop, so that would have annoyed the agent. But I got sort of a message from the manager saying, actually, I think we might be able to squeeze in 2 or 3. There's these markets that we're not going to on the headline tour. And within an hour, I had texted, Jacaranda in Liverpool. I texted Wax and Beans in Bury, sort of Greater Manchester. And within an hour, we had shows locked. Do you know what I mean? And they said, yeah, right, up for this. 100%, count us in. And there's just so few parts of the industry when you talk about DSPs and when you talk about sync and when you talk about, these other bits where, there's gatekeepers on gatekeepers and, it's a much bigger process. So I love that part, and bands can absolutely access that part if they want to.
What does it mean to the label getting that number 1? Is it just cool, or does it actually have an impact?
It's cool. Yeah, I mean, it was a special moment for us. It was a special moment because it had taken so long. It was a special moment for everyone on the team because, with the exception of Charlie, who's the agent, who'd had, I think, one before, everyone on the team, it was their first one. And that's a moment that I think is meaningful to even people outside the industry. So much of what we do, our band played this stage, or we got a placement in this Netflix show, or, people glaze over kind of thing. When you, if you tell your parents that, or you tell your friends that, whatever they ask, they sort of glaze over a little bit. It's hard to, but having the number 1 album in the country sort of, it's pretty black and white. Like, do you know what I mean? When Oasis was number 2 and that kind of, it's pretty, slaps you in the face a little bit. So that was really meaningful to the band. If that band, K's, have been together since 2017. That's a 8-year journey. So yeah, very rare do you have those moments, I think, where it sort of feels like it's culminating in something or it's come together. And I think that was the general feeling with that kind of number one record. And it definitely means a lot. It for us and how we're talking about it, it kind of just proves what we've been banging the desk about, which is that you can be independent. And I'm not saying we're the only place you can do it, by the way, but you can be independent, you can retain your rights and compete at that level. And it's nice, you can talk about that till you're blue in the face, but it's nice to have a few case studies to be able to say, look, we put up a number that a Frontline label, a Sony, a Universal, Warner Frontline would have been tremendously proud of. And so it's a proof of concept.
Does it make it easier to sign bigger bands, or does it make it easier for you to get licenses with other labels for the territory?
For sure. I think, it helps just us people become more aware of the company, and yeah, perhaps some artists that maybe previously wouldn't have considered it, when you put up a number like that, or we've had, a couple of in a row with that band, and a couple of, handful of kind of top 40 records in a row, you sort of think, okay, well, yeah, that's an option now. And that was all perception, and probably, the day one payday was the quote unquote problem in our deals. The back end, the artist friendliness of it all has never been an issue. So if you can kind of fix those one or two things on the front end, then it puts you in an infinitely better position. And so, yeah, hopefully it helps you kind of grow, but and take on bigger and better things. But no, it hasn't. We didn't wake up the next day and have a totally different ethos. It's still about developing new things. Not everything's a chart play, and I'm relieved to have a few weeks off from studying Reddit as to when Taylor's going to drop the record. We were utterly convinced you just get in the bubble, and we were just utterly convinced there was a surprise Taylor record coming because Taylor Nation was posting a countdown, and as it turned out, we were a few weeks early, mercifully. But we were utterly convinced there was a Folklore 5 years, or there was a, surprise TS12, coming, and we were going to put up this amazing number, and it was going to be a tenth of what Taylor sold, whatever. And that was what it would be remembered for.
At least you got away with that then.
Yeah, right.
You went on the Money Trench podcast.
Yes.
And you mentioned that there was a chance to sign the 1975 before they were the 1975.
Yeah, I don't know if I've overplayed that in my mind. They were definitely, Matty was running around, I'm sure he doesn't listen to the Money Trench, so I think it's okay. But Matty was running around at our shows, and they would come to the Blackpool shows and things like that. And we would sort of help them out when in the Drive Like I Do era. They would play. We talked about PBR earlier. They played PBR and things. And yeah, I think I was kind of making the point that would have been a lovely one. Of course, the rights we wouldn't have even papered it probably in those days, so the rights would not exist anymore, but that would have been a lovely little 7-inch to have in the back pocket if there'd been a little Drive Like I Do 7-inch. But yeah, maybe how stories change in the telling. Maybe I've overplayed that, but definitely they would come to Blackpool. We would help them. We would often get the call, need merch. Where can I get merch? They were changing the name a lot at that time. So
right.
we need new T-shirts. Those kind of things. Are sort of happy to help. But yeah, never could have imagined what was to come.
Did they have the stage performance and the attitude back then?
I mean, even the songs were. That's when you talk about the industry and getting things wrong. Most of the hits from the first record were years old, and Robbers, Chocolate, they were playing those songs, and A&R after A&R after A&R was watching them play, probably at Satan's Hollow or something. So maybe that was skewing their thought process.
Yeah.
And going, no, do you know what I mean? And so that just goes to show that all of us have those kind of humbling moments, and all of us get stuff wrong. But yeah, even those songs existed. And did they have the stage presence? Yeah, I mean, they were the exact same kids. Yeah, there was absolutely always something there, but maybe that's hindsight. But I'm sure there was. They were always a level above, kind of, yeah, which is maybe a backhanded compliment when you're talking about seeing them at a show of Satan's Hollow or something. But yeah, it was always phenomenally good.
I actually remember seeing them. It was probably like 15 years ago in at South by Southwest.
Okay.
If you ever went to that.
Yeah.
And I was with Lee Parsons, who owns Ditto Music,
Yeah.
and he was stood there being like, "Trust me, bro, 3 years, biggest band in the world," and I was like, "They're all right."
Yeah.
Like,
Lee should have got on it. Absolutely. It sounds like he was there, one of the first. Because I think the story goes, and the podcasts I've listened to and the things I've read, that everybody passed, some people multiple times.
what's the most challenging part of your job? Or what are the most common misconceptions people have about it?
I think the common misconception is that it's glamorous, that it's just, festival, side stage at Reading to side stage at Reading, a few beers and, off to the hotel. And and I wish that was it. It's very lugging boxes and doing all sorts. I think the challenging bit is also the bit that we love, which is you're doing something different every day, and as an indie, as like we would still call it like DIY, you're doing something different, every single day. Some days you are doing those boardroomy type things, and some days you're, taking stock to our D2C people in Burnley. Do you know what I mean? Like it's and that's the challenge, but also that's the bit that keeps it interesting. I love all that part of it, and it kind of takes me back to. It constantly reminds you of the start of the label, which I think is important that you don't lose sight of that. In terms of what's challenging in our job, in my job, I think just understanding the landscape in 2025, understanding how to break an artist and be a really, really good partner. I think it's a really tough time to be an artist in terms of there's obviously an expectation on artists to make content sometimes every day, and you can put hours into a piece of content that gets 100 views, and then you can do something stupid in 10 seconds and it gets 100,000 views or more. And, kind of getting your head around that, I think as an artist is one of the toughest things. And so we try and be there for them, but also are really self-aware enough to know that I don't have to wake up every morning and be creative and be, turn the phone on myself and, speak to the camera, not because I can't think of anything worse, so we really try and be self-aware and understand that. But also we have to lay out to artists that, certainly anything of ours, with the possible exception of the case, albeit the socials kind of come up, but anything of ours that's gone in the past 5 years has had the social component and had had an understanding of what it means to grow and speak to your corner of the internet on TikTok or on Reels.
If a band really doesn't have that together, would you not be interested in signing them?
I mean, never say never, but I think it's really hard. We do have that conversation sometimes, usually not in the pitch, I guess, but if we're working with an artist, again, to be really clear, we're not the company that's holding a gun to your head and saying, make a TikTok, because that's just not how we are. But we do sometimes have to have that full and frank conversation where it's like, okay, if it's not social, tell us how it's going to, let's discuss how it's going to happen. And the only kind of other routes, you could make the case is slightly different because it kind of came out of 2017 and definitely got the social right now. And they're fortunate that they're in a position where really someone can just follow them with the camera and the kind of dressing room stuff is watchable and funny. But, I think for other artists, there's maybe a couple that have kind of come through the more Six Music route and gone down that road. But everybody else, like I say, any of our artists that have gone and, perhaps signed to a major or, had viral moments or had really meaningful moments, it's come through social. Particularly this past 5 years. And so as a consequence, yeah, that's definitely when you're doing your diligence and when you're looking at potentially signing something new, for sure, you look at the Instagram, for sure, you look at the TikTok. And it doesn't have to have, I think there's a misconception that you have to see hundreds of thousands of views. What you have to see is a willingness to create and a voice. Do you know what I mean? Even if it hasn't reached its people yet, but if you can kind of watch the content and it be compelling, even if it has 300 views, if you can watch the content and think, I'd watch this, this is entertaining, I can see who this speaks to, then it has a shot at, hopefully as we amplify it and help them create and help them, steer the ship 5 or 10%, then, it has a shot at connecting.
Another label, Hopeless, started signing, I guess I don't know if it's the right thing to call it, but like heritage pop punk.
Yeah.
Is that something that in the future you'd be interested in doing, signing bands that have been big in the past?
Yeah, love Hopeless and love it's Eric, isn't it? Love the podcast you did. Probably for the Lab brand, I think our focus is new music. There is the odd exception to that rule, and we definitely, Somerset, for example, but we worked the first Somerset record, so, it's an exception. But, I think the Lab brand generally is early career artists. Whether that changes in the next 5 years, who knows? I think certainly now, if we were looking at heritage artists or, something that perhaps didn't fit that brand, we could certainly work it. We have occasionally white labeled things, or, we're talking about maybe another imprint. If we feel like we can help and it's a good fit, we don't want to say no, but we also, are protective of the brand, and we don't want it to be, you rightly said, it's confusing enough as it is. So let's not confuse it even more. We definitely want to be true to the brand. And I think the brand, for those who know it, the brand is synonymous with new music, and early kind of career artists. So we, I suspect for the heritage thing, we might look at doing it through another name.
If there was one point in the career that you could go back to, when would it be?
Just because it was great, or...
I always ask it as though just because it was great, but sometimes people answer that as, this is something I'd correct.
Yeah. Okay. Well, there'd be too many. How long have you got? In terms of when a time, I guess just for nostalgia, you would love to go back to, and it's definitely got nothing to do with money because there was no money about. You would love to kind of go back to that. I don't think you ever kind of have the same feeling as when you're sort of building the company in the very, very early stages. And, I remember turning up in Southampton to join us. And I'm from right up north. So it was my first time, and that's so far from home. And, it was our label tour. We used to do a label tour many, many years ago. And so we had 3 of our acts playing. And this would have been 2008 and 2009. And we turned up at the Joiners. I think we were probably running late. So it would have been 6 o'clock or 6:30. And there was a queue. And, it was probably only 60 kids. But it blew my mind that so far from home, our name was on the tour. Of course, it was the acts that was drawing the crowd, but it was our tour, it was our label tour. And there was 60 kids outside the Joiners in Southampton. And that was just a feeling that, I can still remember to this. And I'm not sure you ever kind of recreate those, but I mean, any time that you see an act, the ones that are top of mind, I guess South Arcade just did main stage. And I definitely saw that band play to a lot less people than that. And that's the classic A&R person's answer, is seeing something go from, a quiet room to, thousands and thousands of people. And that is a pretty good feeling. I agree with that. That is a pretty good feeling. But yeah, I think those sort of times are the ones that stick to you, because I would tour, I would go around even in, occasionally in the US in those days. And those are, pretty hard to beat. It would be silly now, kind of sleeping on a sofa at 37. You know, it'd be a bit maybe slightly sad. But yeah, when you're the right age for it and healthy enough to do it, you know, you make friendships and bonds that are just pretty impossible to recreate other ways.
Do you think with the amount of opportunities that are coming to you now, that if I asked you the question in 10 years, you'd look back at now and think, oh, that was such an exciting time?
I hope so. That's an amazing question, by the way. I hope so. I think I really try and be in the moment and try and understand that, you know, we talked a lot about it. You know, people are going to get sick of me talking about it, but you know, because it's so fresh in the number one. So the day the record went to number one, completely coincidentally, the band was playing at Kendal Calling, and the chart was announced at 5. Obviously, we knew earlier in the day, but the chart was announced at 5, and they were on stage at 5:45. So, you know, went out with the trophy kind of thing. And the whole team, not the whole team was there, but the vast majority of the team was there. And, you know, was with Jamie, the singer's dad, and the manager's been involved a long time. The agent's been involved longer than any of us. Our team at ADA, a couple of people from our team, you know, and just that feeling and talk about being in the moment. I remember sort of saying, I'm not sure how we get better than this. You know, I hope we all collectively, band, us, ADA, whoever, have a lot more number one records. But the first one, you know, and kind of being together, and, you know, there was people in tears, and, you know, Jamie's dad sort of having that proud moment, being in tears, and, you know, emails were coming in, and our Music Week piece was just when, you know, when the band's on stage, and the first 3 emails I got were Music Week piece live, Billboard piece live, you know, Music Business Will Work, whatever. And yeah, I remember kind of turning to the people who had sort of worked on it, and I'm like, not sure how it gets better than this. You know, it just felt like one of those moments. And yeah, you can count on one hand in 17 years I've been doing it that you have one of those. But the first one, do you know what I mean? So yeah, I think that's the kind of pinch me moment that's top of mind. And like I say, the nature of the slow build of a business is that you don't tend to have those, you know, in music at all. It's not, you know, in sport, and I suppose you have those kind of, you know, you win the playoff final, or you win, and it's like a very kind of specific, the final whistle went and you felt joy. Do you know what I mean? In music, it's a lot more, it's spread over weeks, months, years, those moments. And so you very rarely do you have that, you know, pause to think about it. Do you know what I mean?
So it's nice that you're all there together and you get to actually acknowledge it.
It was lovely. Yeah, that one in particular, because so much work, starting with the band, so much work had gone in. And people worked incredibly long hours to kind of make that happen. And so, yeah, it was lovely to be able to kind of share that moment and kind of say thanks to everybody. But it started with you know, I can't sign thousands of records. The band had to meet all the fans and sign the records. And, you know, it started with them and their work ethic.
What advice would you give to somebody that wanted to start their own label now in 2025?
Yeah, do it. You know, I know a lot of people would, and I jokingly say, run from it. I think, why not? Like the playing field, like we talked about earlier, is so level. Like if you have a good ear and you can find 1 artist, 2 artists, 3 artists that are great, or you believe them to have the potential to be great, you can create a buzzy act in your bedroom. Do you know what I mean? Or in their bedroom, or in their garage, or in their practice room in the South Arcade case, perhaps. You know, you don't need. 20 years ago, it would have been almost impossible to create something that could be heard all over the world, or, you know, without the backing of a label or a major record label. So there's never been a better time. If you have a fantastic creative idea or marketing idea, and you can kind of help, if you're a label person or a manager, whatever, if you can help that creative, help that artist reach an audience, then absolutely go and do it. You know, you can go from, there's never been, I'm sure this isn't just the case for music, there's never been a better time in probably human history that you can go from nothing to something in 3 months.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like literally, there's some of our artists and definitely, you know, some peers and friend, you know, artists that wasn't a great deal. They were doing their thing, but there wasn't a great deal going on. There wasn't a great deal of hype. And in the space of 6 weeks, becomes the hottest deal, you know, becomes something that everybody's chasing. And, you know, I'm not sure that would have been possible even 10 years ago, you know. So absolutely go and do it. Maybe don't drop out of university or whatever you're doing at the time. Like have a plan B just to be the kind of safe answer. But why not? It's you know, it's a fantastic business. It's a privilege really to be a part of it. And if you can forge your way, then by all means go do it.
Is there anything you want to mention or promote before we finish?
Wow. No. Go and if you're on Instagram at Lab Records, yeah, go and say hello. But apart from that, yeah, if you go and listen to the music, or not just ours, there's some amazing new music out there. So yeah, go and do that.
Thank you very much. It's been awesome having you on.
Thank you.
For everyone that's watched, thank you. For everyone that wants to just listen to it, we're available on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere else that you can get a podcast. Please follow, rate, and review. Please follow, rate, and review wherever you get yours, and we'll catch you next time.